Last week, we had a delightful talk with legendary scientist Charles Darwin. This week, we shift from the Earth to the Moon as we get a look back at the once-in-a-lifetime event that was the super blue blood moon. We'll be covering what it is, how it happens, and why it's just as cool as it sounds. I'm your host, Maddie Peterson, and you're watching Geographic. On January 31st, there was a stellar event called a super blue blood moon. Depending on where you live, if you looked at the moon, it would be massive and blood red. But before we go loony, we should probably talk about what this phenomenon actually is. As out of this world as a super blue blood moon sounds, it's actually just three fairly common lunar phenomena happening at the same time. Let's break it down. The reason it's called a supermoon is because it looked much larger than it normally does. This happened because the moon was closer to Earth than it usually is during its orbit. The moon revolves around Earth in an elliptical motion instead of a perfect circle, so sometimes it can not only look bigger, but brighter too. This was also a blue moon event, which means that it was the second full moon of the month. Usually there's only one full moon every month, and just like how the moon orbit is not perfectly circular, the moon cycle doesn't perfectly sync with the calendar, and is actually a 28-day cycle. While not incredibly rare, it still only comes around every once in a blue moon. Finally, the reason it's called a blood moon is because it had a deep red color. This is because there's actually a total lunar eclipse happening. The moon turns red during lunar eclipses because the dispersed light from Earth's sunrises and sunsets land on the face of the moon, giving it a copper red tint. Lunar eclipses happen usually 2 to 5 times a year, but total eclipses are a bit more rare, happening about once a year. All these phenomena happened at the same time, giving us a giant red full moon to marvel at. Like I said earlier, each of these events on their own are pretty common, but what makes this time so special is that they rarely happen together. In fact, the last time this happened was in 1886. Its relative rarity isn't the only thing that made it such a special night. Because the conditions were just right, scientists were able to look for good spots to land for new rover missions. This is because the face of the moon was receiving less light from the sun than it usually does. This means that the surface of the moon changed temperature for a short period of time. By carefully watching and studying how different areas change temperature, scientists can actually see what those areas are made of. This information gives them better options for where to land when rovers, or even more importantly, when people are sent to the moon. Right now, NASA is working to send a rover to explore the poles of the moon, which have larger ice deposits. Studying the frozen moon water could help future astronauts utilize it as a resource if more moon missions become planned. So learning about the safest places to land a spacecraft is very crucial. I hope you got a chance to see this phenomenon, but don't despair if you didn't. NASA took some excellent pictures which you've been seeing throughout the episode and even had a live video feed of the whole event. Check out the incredible event with the link in the description and check in with us next week as we talk about even more extraordinary science. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to UNCW TealTV. I'm your host, Maddie Peterson, and see you next week, Seahawks.